And President Trump, in all of the discussion about guns, has suggested that school shootings might have something to do with violent video games. In the last hour, he's been holding a closed-door meeting with representatives of video game makers and some of their harshest critics. President Trump said last month that violence in video games is, quote, really shaping young people's thoughts. Game makers, of course, disagree. Joining me now is Jen MacLean. She's the executive director of the International Game Developers Association. Jen, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I don't know if I want to get into a big discussion about whether games are too violent. I think that's a whole different school of thought. But the video games that are out there that people are critical of in terms of their violence and the comfort level that it creates with players are the same video games that anybody around the world can play. Is that correct? That's
absolutely true.
So the issue about, I guess the issue comes down to, do we have more instances are video games somehow driving people to commit crimes in America more than they would be in Canada or Germany or Australia or the UK?
So there's two things to consider here. First, as you just said, we play exactly the same games that the rest of the world plays. There's no science to support a causal relationship between video games and gun violence. But there is the common sense element. If video games caused gun violence, why aren't they causing gun violence in the rest of the world? The thing that sets the United States apart is our access to firearms, not the games we play or the media we consume.
What part do you want to play in this discussion regardless? I mean, I think it's all distraction, right? When we're talking about other important things, video games may be one of them, mental health certainly is one of them, but it does allow the president and the NRA not to talk about guns. That said, you're in the discussion now. What role can you play in saying, all right, is there anything that these video games do that we can deal with that doesn't contribute to this situation?
Yeah, this is clearly a distraction, but it is an opportunity for us to educate parents about game ratings. When you go to buy a video game, it's very clearly rated so that parents know exactly what kind of content is in the game, and parents can make the right choice for their children about what kind of games they want their kids to play. It's also a great opportunity for us to educate the rest of the country on who gamers are. The facts are that more women over 35 play video games than boys 18 and under. The stereotype of gamers being disaffected boys in their parents' basement just isn't true.
Does that apply to the most violent of games, too? Is it mostly women?
No, that's not true but
because I think that's what we're talking about. We're not really, I don't know that we're talking about video games in general. I think we're talking about a specific subset of video games that I think you would agree with anybody might warrant a look.
So those video games make up only 11% of all of the games sold in the United States. When we talk about video games, and this is one of the big problems, when we have conversations without nuance, you end up with people like the NRA saying that video games are bad, that video games are corrupt, when actually video games are a form of free speech and art that's protected by the First Amendment and by the Brown v. EMA Supreme Court decision, where Justice Antonin Scalia acknowledged that there is no research that supports a causal link between video games and gun violence.
Right, and let me just read a little bit from that ruling where it says psychological studies purporting to show a connection between exposure to violent video games and harmful effects on children do not prove that such exposure causes minors to act aggressively. That's Justice Antonin Scalia, the late Antonin Scalia. He's not saying that there's no harm in them. He's just saying don't draw the line between violent video games and shootings, or violent behavior.
And that's exactly why the video game industry has voluntarily adopted a rating system so that anyone who chooses to play a video game, and particularly parents who choose to buy video games for their children, know exactly what their kids are playing.
Do you know when it comes to kids, and I know that a lot of people who game are not kids, but when it comes to kids, do we have adequate controls that, I mean, I would imagine many kids buy their own video games. Do these ratings matter if you're young and your parents aren't buying you the video game?
So major retailers around the United States adhere very strictly to the video game rating system. In fact, if you try and buy an M-rated game at a retailer like GameStop or Best Buy, you will be carded. I've been carded trying to buy an M-rated video game, and I'm clearly not younger than 17.
Jen, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Jen MacLean is the executive director of the International Game Developers Association. I want to go to Kelly.